19.5, all this weird stuff. Von Braun was associated with Disney, who was a Scottish Rite Freemason, a 33rd degree. We've all heard the stories about there being a Club 33. He produced a program called Man in the Moon, which is all about the first trip to the moon. In that program, and I apologize, we had video, but it went over, they actually sent up a flare and they spot, guess what, an alien base on the dark side of the moon. All these little messages that Von Braun put in stuff. At JPL, you had people like Theodore von Karman and Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was the probably most preeminent rocket scientist of the 1930s. He invented solid rocket motors, solid rocket fuel. A tremendous breakthrough which got us into the space age. And he was an occultist. He was a very, very close associate of Aleister Crowley, who was mentioned earlier. There's a great book by Farrell House called Sex and Rockets, all about Mr. Parsons. JPL was founded on Halloween, 1936. So there's all these little occult things. Here's Crowley, dressed up as a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. Nobody knows if he ever was. He claimed to have been channeling messages from Horus himself, trying to change the world. I'm going to skip through a lot of this stuff. One of the things that's really interesting is that there's a new book out called Secret Agent 666. And basically, what they're saying is that Crowley apparently was on our side. He claimed to have been working for the Allies as an agent, a secret agent, and was influential in getting Rudolf Hess to defect to the West. So that's another thing I've got to get into. Here's Parsons at his mansion in Pasadena. Again, Farah mentioned Rosemary's Baby, and really I think Rosemary's Baby is a depiction of something that took place in California with Jack Parsons and a guy named L. Ron Hubbard, who went on to found the Church of Scientology. They did something called the Babylon Working, and it involved a woman named Marjorie Cameron, who went straight from her job with the Joint Chiefs of Staff as a secretary to Jack Parsons' mansion and started having sex with him. And the purpose of it was to create what's called a moonchild in magical thinking, in magical circles. Basically, it's a child that's going to have spiritual powers, godlike powers, and the purpose of it was to give birth to the Antichrist. And again, this is a little bit about it. I don't have time to go through it, but the purpose of the whole thing is the Babylon Working, as it's called, is to bring on the apocalypse and create the Antichrist. So this is the guy who founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory out in Pasadena that does all the unmanned probes. And again, at their core root belief system, they have the same belief in Isis, Osiris, and Horus as their gods. So again, it makes complete sense that they would be doing stuff to, this sort of following this ancient Egyptian astrology. So let me get to the last part of it here. So basically everybody who was anybody at NASA was a member of one of these three different groups. They all have the same core belief system. They seem to have stamped their process, their behaviors, or their influence on the program in very specific ways, landing on the moon on Hitler's birthday, landing in accordance with this strange Egyptian astrology. And the next time we went back to the moon, Mars, was in 1997 with Pathfinder. Guess what? After all this stuff had come out, after Richard had done all these presentations, presented this stuff at NASA, all about hyperdimensional physics and tetrahedrons, they go back to Mars with Mars Pathfinder, and the space probe itself is shaped like a tetrahedron, and they landed it at 19.5 degrees by 33 degrees on Mars. So even Graham Hancock couldn't resist that one. He said, okay, I think he got us on that one. Again, Earth was there. There's stuff at the landing site that looks bizarre. There's pyramids. There's something that looks to me a little bit like a sphinx at the Mars Pathfinder landing site. And so the 33 degrees, why is it important? What we think is that 33 degrees is sort of a code for 19.5 degrees. And what this basically tells the person that understands the code is that if you can figure out the secret of the tetrahedron and how to harness that energy, you can basically have unlimited energy and technology that can allow you to do stuff like make flying saucers, make stuff that can do incredible stuff that can defy gravity. One of the relationships is that the sign of 1947 is 33333. A tetrahedron also has something that's called, there's a nodal scientific notational system called the Schaeffler system, and its symbol is 3, 3. If you take the comma out, you get 33. So again, I think 33 connects to tetrahedrons. There's all sorts of other interesting stuff. If you were to start out at the Great Pyramids of Giza and you were to set your compass at 333, you would end up on the doorstep of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I mean, literally right at the front door, at the front gate. So there's all kinds of weird things that are This is some other stuff. I work right here. I'm not going to tell you who I work for, but I work in Space Park, the Space Park area of Redondo Beach. And I noticed as I was driving around that there's all these there's Gemini Drive, there's Mercury Avenue, there's Columbia Avenue, and there's also Isis Avenue. Where is it? Right there, Isis Avenue. And there's also a street called 33rd Street. And okay, so Isis comes through here. 33rd is, where is it? Did I miss it? Okay, so anyway, 33rd and Isis intersect right here, and there's these buildings with pyramids on them. There's a funny little symbol there, which looks like an 8-pointed star, which is an occult symbol. So there's kind of this weird encoding that goes on in architecture. It's what Farah was talking about all this sort of, these architects seem to have follow the same bizarre astrological practices. Here's the Luxor Pyramid in Vegas. I love to go to Vegas. I love to stay there. And there's a Sphinx guarding it, and its actual address is 3900 Las Vegas Boulevard, which again is 19.5 times 2. So I'm looking at this stuff and I'm going, this is not a coincidence. And now they don't even hide it anymore. We're going back to the moon, we're building Apollo again, and we're going to call the program Orion. They may as well just call it Osiris. So before they hid the symbol of Orion in the Apollo patch behind a Greek mythology, now they just come right out and say it's Orion or Osiris. Okay, I'm pretty much, is that it, or can I keep going? I got some time. Okay. One of the questions we had when we first presented this stuff for Dark Mission last fall was, okay, so what? So they did this. Besides the fact that they stole our space program from us, and they did things to their own occult, ritualistic belief systems, and didn't tell us they were doing them, what is the impact of this? Well, I think the whole impact has to do with this document. It's called the Brookings Report. It's officially titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. And in this document, which was commissioned by NASA at the dawn of the space program, it essentially tells them, you are probably going to find artifacts. You're going to find ruins. You're going to find exactly the kind of stuff that we see in these pictures on the moon and on Mars. And if you do find them, you should consider whether you should withhold it from the public. The reason it describes, the reason it gives is because cultures that suddenly discover they're not the top dog when they thought they were the top dog disintegrate. And it specifically says, War of the Worlds is a great example. The War of the Worlds broadcast by Orson Welles. Society could disintegrate. So President Kennedy is considered basically the father of the American space program. And the story is that, you know, we were in a space race with the Russians, and we were trying to beat them, and it was all about politics and Cold War politics and all that stuff. But Kennedy, right after the Brookings Report was delivered to Congress and right after the Russians put a man into space, Yuri Gagarin, Kennedy went out and he gave a speech. And the speech was called The President and the Press. And basically what he did is he went to the press and he implored them to help him root out secrecy and secret societies. This is a quote. He said, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are as a people inherently and historically opposed to secret societies. Who do you think he meant by that? Secret societies? Maybe the Masons? To secret oaths and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers which are cited to justify it. And I think what he's specifically referring to here is the Brookings Report, which he just received a few weeks before that. Now, 2 weeks after this speech, he goes on and he says, guess what? We're going to go to the moon. And we're going to do it before this decade is out. And then he goes to Vienna, where he meets Nikita Khrushchev in June of 1961. Now, this is generally considered a disastrous foreign policy defeat for President Kennedy. But what people did not know until very recently was that at that meeting, he proposed to Khrushchev, not that we have a competition in space, not that we have a space race, but that we go to the moon together in one joint space program. Khrushchev rejected it. He made the offer again in secret right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. He said, look, Nikita, we've got to find a way to come together. We've basically stared down the barrel. We almost got ourselves blown up. And we need to try to find a way to work together. And Khrushchev again rejected him. But then, in 1963, in August, he proposed secretly once again to Khrushchev, let's go to the moon together. Let's stop this insane competition. And Khrushchev turned him down. So Kennedy said, to hell with it. What I'm going to do now is go do this publicly. So he went to the UN on September 20th, and he said, we need to start cooperating in space. with the Soviet Union, with the Russians. He made a public proposal. The Russians did not respond. The press reaction was pretty negative. Here's a cartoon from the period saying, I was afraid something like this might happen if you kept talking about it. There's Kennedy and Khrushchev locked up in the rocket. We'll send them to the moon. Politicians were opposed to it, particularly a congressman named Albert Thomas from Houston, who was a close political ally of Lyndon Johnson and who controlled all of NASA's funding. Now,